Good morning. Welcome to session 4 from BC to ESV. Today's session I'm entitling Wide as the Waters. So to get underway, let me pray for us. Dear Lord God, thank you for bringing us today together, that we can fellowship and enjoy your word. Help us to grow and to understand you better and to look at how your word has been carried forward from ancient times to reach us today, and help us appreciate the great sacrifices that were made in order to do that. And we ask your blessing on our time this morning. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay. Does anyone have any questions before I get underway? No. All right, well, let's go then. I have an exercise I was going to have you do, but I think I'm going to wait and see if we have time at the end because I have a lot of ground to cover. So we'll just hold off on that. So, brain teaser and review. So, the Vulgate is A, the oldest English translation of the Bible, B, the oldest Latin translation of the Bible, or C, the oldest Greek translation of the Bible. Latin translation of the Bible, yes, okay. Who wrote the Vulgate? Jerome, okay, very good. All right. Which is the older, the Vulgate or the Septuagint? Septuagint. Good, all right. Which of the following are Indo-European languages? Latin, Hebrew, or Greek? Indo-European languages. Remember back to the first session? Family of languages, family trees. Latin and Greek are Indo-European languages, right. So they're, Kathy. So, Latin and Greek, so they have a lot of similarities and affinities with each other, whereas Hebrew is totally alien. What language family does Hebrew come from? Chris, did I hear did you say it? No? All right, sorry. Semitic, yes, it's a Semitic language. That's the narrowest branch. The broader family of languages are called Afro-Asiatic languages, which obviously means they grew up in more of an African and Asian locale than European. Okay, and Koine is a form of ancient Hebrew, ancient Greek, or ancient Canadian? Yeah, it's a form of ancient Greek, right? Okay, it's the common Greek, the street Greek, the Greek that was used by merchants, traders, foremen, and people like that in the eastern part of the area that was the Roman Empire. And why was that? It's because of Alexander the Great conquered that whole area, and he left this Greek language and culture. And it's especially important because that's the language that early Christianity was written in. Okay. The oldest complete translation of the Bible into English was by John Wycliffe in 1384, John Huss in 1412, William Tyndale in 1525, or Sir Stephen Dewey in 2015. Wycliffe, yes, it was Wycliffe. Okay. All right, very good. Good job, class. I mean, you guys, you get two thumbs up for that. Okay, let's look at a little timeline here. The reason I mostly wanted to do this was because I hadn't given you a timeline, and my wife, being my biggest and greatest critic told me that, hey, you know, I can't follow what's going on as far as the time is, so you better put a timeline up there. So I have. So 10 Commandments, and I pulled this off the internet. I didn't create this one, although I adjusted it, I adapted it. 10 Commandments, they're saying around 1400 BC. Well, that's give or take, you know, several hundred years probably. And then we go all the way to the year, let's say 300, between 300 and 200, when the Septuagint was written. Remember, the Septuagint is a Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures written in Egypt with a Latin name. What a beast. Okay. From the Septuagint to the Greek New Testament, we're going from about 2 to 300 BC to around 100 AD, give or take. You see the gap here isn't a whole lot. And then from the Greek New Testament, we get to the Latin Vulgate. That's only from around the year 100 to between 300 and 400. And so that's not a big gap. But now you see there's this huge gap until we get to anything else that's truly significant here. And this is I would call the so-called Middle Ages. You know, remember, nobody woke up one Sunday morning in the year 1215, stretched and said, oh, what a great day in the Middle Ages. It didn't happen. That's artificial. It's an artificial categorization that we like to hang things on. And I think in some ways it distorts actually what was going on. There was a lot going on in the Middle Ages in one sense. And there was very little going on in the Middle Ages in another sense. If you were born as a peasant in the Middle Ages, and almost everybody was a peasant, like 95% of the people, there was no such thing as middle class in the Middle Ages. If you were born as a peasant, it's been observed that you probably lived in the same village that you were born in your entire life. You probably never got any further away from that village than one day's walk. And you probably never received any more news than we would find in one issue of one daily newspaper. And so it was a very quiet, very changeless existence in a sense. But there were still things going on in the Middle Ages. And then we're going to get to these things that are happening today. So there's the Wycliffe Bible, Gutenberg's Bible, the Geneva Bible, and preview of coming attractions, the King James Bible. Okay. Who was known as the morning star of the Reformation? King James, William Tyndale, John Huss, Erasmus, John Wycliffe, Archbishop William Walker. Is Archbishop Walker here today? No, don't think so. Or William Caxton. The morning star of the Reformation. Has anybody heard this expression before? You guys have. The younger people over there, I see heads nodding. And so who was it? Said, yes, I've heard of it, but gosh, I don't remember who it was. The morning star of the Reformation was John Wycliffe. King James, obviously, King James Version of the Bible. William Tyndale comes along a little bit later than the beginnings of the Reformation. John Huss was a Bohemian. Bohemia means modern Czechoslovakia, or I guess it's the Czech Republic now. Modern Czech Republic. Erasmus was a Dutch theologian, writer, author, philosopher, extremely brilliant guy who created the first complete Greek Bible that had been done since the early apostolic age. And we're going to talk about John Wycliffe. Archbishop Walker is not here, so we better not talk about him. William Caxton was an early English printer. He was a 15th century printer. He printed maybe 100 different books. He influenced printing and book reading in England, but he never printed a Bible because he was scared to death to do that. If he had, at that point, 15th century, that would have got him probably a hot steak. Or off with his head. Either way, Dan, it would have worked out poorly for him, yes. All right, let's see here. This is I'm ahead of myself. Yes, I am ahead of myself. Well, let me talk about back up for, well, no, I'm not going to back up. So, John Wycliffe. Has people heard of the Wycliffe Bible translations? Yes, Alex is nodding. Yes, people are nodding their head. Yeah, okay, good. So that's where we get that from. So who was Wycliffe? He was an Englishman, born in the year 1328, and he died in 1384. He was a brilliant scholar and a theologian, matriculated at Oxford College at age 17, and he remained there as a student and teacher for 35 years. He attained the degree of Doctor of Divinity. He was ordained as a priest, and he practiced as a priest. He served congregations, preached, and so on as a priest. Now you have to understand, this is still the Catholic Church for several hundred years into the future. He was a prolific writer. He wrote a lot of books and theological books of apparently great sophistication, and he argued against people. Apparently he actually enjoyed doing theological arguments and usually won his arguments with people. So he was, this is scholastic age, this is still the quote-unquote Middle Ages. He was a brilliant guy. And he wrote in both Latin and English. The language of educated people in the Middle Ages was Latin. So if you were in England, you could speak to someone in France or in Italy or Spain, because everybody that was educated knew Latin. He might have known Geoffrey Chaucer. So we know Geoffrey Chaucer. Chaucer, Canterbury Tales. Famous piece of English literature written in the Middle Ages. There aren't very many, but Chaucer's Canterbury Tales is a famous one. So in the Middle Ages, what did you do for fun? Well, let's see. There was no internet, there was no TV, no movies, no radio. They didn't have jet skis or snowmobiles. So what did you do? Bowling. You just went bowling. Okay. They actually did have bowling. I don't know if it goes back all the way to the Middle Ages, but when the Spanish Armada showed up off the coast of England in 1588, they say Sir Francis Drake was bowling, and he had to be called away from his bowling game to go fight the Spanish. They celebrated festivals. Good. We're getting warm. And they went on pilgrimages. Good job. All right. So the Canterbury Tales is about a bunch of different people, little vignettes about these different people that went on pilgrimages. And this is a classic of English literature. And it's thought that Geoffrey Chaucer, who wrote the Canterbury Tales, might have known Wycliffe, and he might have used Wycliffe as his model for one of the priests' stories in the Canterbury Tales. Okay, so as this brilliant scholar, he studied grammar, rhetoric, logic, philosophy, and theology, and he went and studied the Latin Vulgate Bible for 4 years. And it is said that he preached on every chapter in the Vulgate. Now, that sounds almost impossible, but it's been said. Okay, this is a page from a Wycliffe Bible. There's still some around. And I don't know about you, but if I still looked that good after 700 years, I'd be really happy about it. You can see how bright and clean and clear this page is. And it's a manuscript. That is, every part of that was handwritten. And it's an illuminated manuscript, meaning it has those incredibly beautiful illustrations. So not printed, manuscript. Yes. Yeah, Yeah, I don't. I was taking so many things, images off the internet. I'm trying to remember. Some of the things I was looking at were like at the British Library. Yes, yes.
Would that be like a 12-inch or an 18-inch book?
Ah, that's a good question. So, yeah, more than likely it was a larger one. But I can't remember why I snatched this particular image. British libraries, universities have a lot of these. Museums have a lot of these, manuscripts. So, yes,
And that was actually handwritten?
yeah,
A printing press?
handwritten. Handwritten on many, well, let's see, if I have the stats. I don't. A lot of these, probably most of these medieval manuscripts, again, medieval is just Latin for Middle Ages, were written on parchment or vellum. Parchment and vellum are just animal skins. But the thing is, these animal skins, they endure. They're much better to write on than paper. Paper self-destructs, especially paper that was made in the last 150 years. It's acidic. So it just burns up, becomes fragile and falls apart. Whereas the vellum looks kind of like the scribe just finished and went off to lunch, or maybe to equipping hour, I don't know. Wycliffe's translation was probably not very good. I have to say that. I mean, it's important. It's incredibly important. But he was translating from what? Latin, the Vulgate, not the original languages. And he was doing, well, remember back the first class, the different translation philosophies? What were they? What were there was two opposite translation philosophies. We can translate either word for word. Yeah, it was probably a pretty word for word translation. So it might not have been the best translation that was ever done. So having said that, there are still about 250 copies of the Wycliffe Bible. And I should say, there was an original Wycliffe. It was revised by some of his followers, so there's a couple variations on the Wycliffe Bible. But 250 copies from the 14th century is pretty impressive. One sold in 2016 for $1,692,500. So that's a pretty good return on his investment, which was a lot of time. All right. This is a detail from the Bible, and I just wanted you to see that it's in what we call Gothic black letter script. And this is really hard to read. You'd hate to sit down and have to read through this thing. You can also see on the left-hand side where the scribe has put ruled lines. So that's interesting. And this is what it actually says. So, and it was done in those days. A mandament went out from the Emperor August. Mandament. Wow, what the heck is that? Well, we can sort of infer from the context what that would be, right? Mandate, decree, right? So you can translate that different ways. Mandate sounds right, probably. So from the Emperor Augustus that all the world should be described. Described is not a word that I don't think anybody's using these days. So yes, this first describing. So I'm not going to read the whole thing. You get the idea. Wycliffe's Bible was in Middle English, the same kind of English Chaucer used. It's not real easy to read. And we probably wouldn't want to sit down and read it. However, it was very important because there had never been anything like this before. English people, if we went into a church, we would probably stand there and listen to the priest recite in Latin. We would have no idea what he was saying or doing. And there was no way we could get our hands on the Bible and read it. The only way we could know biblical stories, in many cases, was to look at the stained glass windows where they told, some of the biblical stories. Right? Okay. So, Wycliffe, not only did he translate the Bible, but this was because what motivated him is he thought that there weren't any. He really was ahead of his time. He prefigured the Protestant Reformation, which wasn't going to come along until like the 15th and 16th centuries. So what did he believe? No church offices were authorized by Scripture, save that of deacon and priest. What did that eliminate? Yeah, bishops, archbishops, deans, deacons. The list of ecclesiastical offices in the Middle Ages goes on and on and on. And guess what? They weren't real happy about this. He disagreed with the notion that the bread and wine of the Eucharist actually turned into the body and blood of Christ. Now, you guys understand that this is what the Catholic Church believes. That is, the priest with the elements and, his Latin, whatever, is actually the body, the blood, the wine and bread turn into the body and blood of Christ. He said, no, don't think so. He objected to the sale of indulgences. Does anyone know what that is? What's an indulgence? Yeah, it is a get out of jail free. I'll talk about that in just a minute, a little bit more. And there were other things besides that would sound very Protestant to us today. And this is remarkable. I mean, this is in the 14th century, the 1300s. So really ahead of his time. But what we really remember him for, of course, is that he wanted the Scriptures translated in the common language of the people. So, Todd goes into church and can understand what's being said. All right. Barely can understand. So I found an example of a 14th century indulgence here. So what this says is, you can read that scripture. This is the get out of hell card. Be it known to all, I, Father Dave, by authority of Pope Hans I, do hereby absolve Todd of all earthly sins in exchange for the payment of a penny? Oh, come on. Now look, I actually have one here.
I'm more concerned that I'm only worth a penny.
Yes, that could be of concern. Okay, I have one here. I'd like to auction it off. The bidding will start at a penny. I have a penny. I have a penny. Do I hear more? Do I hear more than a penny?
I have
A peppermint and a penny. All right. What is your soul worth? Come on now, Lenny. I mean, this is your eternity, your future. A penny and a peppermint? Well, last week I was with the Presbyterians, and I had hundreds of people buy these. I made thousands of dollars. And the Methodists, I mean, it was great. Okay. So not a big sell here. All right. I was afraid of that. Yes?
What you're making the point, though, is that the people were not being told what the Scripture actually said, so they were believing what they were told. They had faith in the leadership they had.
Exactly. Thanks, Alex. Good point. So, and the leadership, guess what? Wasn't that great sometimes? So, in the Middle Ages, there was what they called the regular clergy and the secular clergy. So the secular clergy were like the parish priests, like pastors, if you will, but not really. But, they preached, they did the offices of, marriage and baptism and blah, blah, blah. The regular clergy, regular meaning from the same word as rule, regular, regulation, rule, those were the monks, the friars. Friar simply means, that's just a corruption of the French word frère, meaning brother. So brother Alex and brother Todd and, sister Lenny and so on. So secular and regular. Well, at some point during the Middle Ages, the regular clergy started doing some of the things that the secular clergy had been the only ones who could perform. And they went around. They traveled around England and, well, the other countries of Europe too. And were doing things like selling indulgences and buying and selling stuff that they shouldn't have been for people. And people resented it. And a lot of them were illiterate even. I mean, they didn't know things like the Ten Commandments. I mean, that's how bad they were. And they were supposed to know all of this stuff. They didn't know squat, frankly. So this is a big, big issue in the Middle Ages, the ignorance of the leaders, the clergy. Very ill-educated, some of them. And yet, they monopolized these offices. They were taking money from the people. It was like you were being taxed. There was no separation of church and state. The church and state were the same. And so this was a big problem. So back to... So this is a print that apparently was fairly popular. It's Wycliffe striking the spark, and Jan Hus, again, Bohemian Protestant reformer, who was lighting the candle, and then we have Martin Luther wielding the torch. So this is an indication how important people thought Wycliffe was. So he, in this chain of increasing drumbeat for reform of the church, to get rid of all these abuses that the church was perpetrating on the people. And, okay, from Wycliffe to Henry VIII, 128 years passed. Conventionally, people say that this was a point where the Middle Ages turned into the Renaissance. And so what was the Renaissance? What was the Renaissance? Gary? Rebirth. Literally, it means rebirth. I find this a little pretentious. It's the Renaissance and the later people, or the people that said this is the Renaissance, that is, rebirth of what? Culture, knowledge, from where? Ancient Greece and Rome. So, the beautiful fluted columns of ancient Greece and, Roman poetry and painting and stuff. And so now this is coming back and the world is becoming enlightened again and blah, blah, blah. Well, that never went away during the Middle Ages. There were plenty of scholars who continued to study and use ancient knowledge. So I find that a little pretentious. And Renaissance is also associated with the notion of humanism. So remember, to the Greeks, man was sort of the measure of all things. So you see how this could be, sort of have an anti-religious tinge to it. And I think probably in our modern intellectual world, we have this notion that the Middle Ages were dark, but I don't believe it totally. Which brings us to our C.S. Lewis moment of the day. And if you don't know me well, I am a fanboy of C.S. Lewis. So Lewis, as I might remind you, was the professor of medieval and Renaissance literature at Cambridge University in the 1950s. And quoting from Helen Cooper, who was a professor emeritus of medieval and Renaissance literature at Cambridge University, as I quote, "For Lewis, cultural history did not divide into the four periods that we now assume in the West." When I say the West, I mean Western Europe, America, Canada, all those countries, not Asian countries. So 4 periods: the classical, the medieval, the Renaissance, or early modern, and the modern. Postmodernism didn't exist in Lewis's day. Thank heavens for that, and he was probably happy. But Lewis thought it divided into 3 periods. Those were the classical, which laid the ground for the next period. That next period, which embraced everything from the fall of Rome to the late 18th century. And finally, the modern period, which Lewis defined as running from the early 19th century, that would be the 1800s, starting with the year 1800, to his own present. So you see, that's quite a different division of history. And if your mental concept shifts in that way, you get a different impression of what's going on. So, classical period to the fall of Rome to the 1800s till now. And Lewis categorized these as the pre-Christian, the Christian, and the post-Christian. That might be you might try thinking of the world of history in that regard. Okay, so what else is happening between Wycliffe and Henry VIII? The printing press was invented, okay, around 1440. Who invented the printing press? Gutenberg. And where was it invented? In Germany? Ja, das ist richtig. And what effect, what impact did this have? Faster information. Say it again, Kay. In the language of the people. Yes, sort of, kind of. We'll talk about that. Yes. Yeah, mass production. Okay. When Gutenberg started printing his books, he printed, the first run of his Bible was about 270 books. That doesn't really sound like a lot, does it? But it was estimated that there were only about 30,000 books that existed in Europe at that point. So it's almost 1%.
But who could read them if the peasants
Wow.
read?
Good point. Yeah. Right. So mass education doesn't come along until quite a bit later. So we're still talking about the elites. Although, having said that, yes, Mina. Did it eliminate the job? Sure. Yeah. Yeah. A little bit. This is an example from later in history, more like the 18th century, but they started bringing in the machines, the beginning of factories, industrial age, and the workers in France had wooden shoes, which were called sabots, which is where we get our word sabotage, because they'd throw the wooden shoes into the machinery to break it. So yes. Ask your question again. You said the peasants put out of work. Yes. So let's get back. So we're considering the religious aspect of things, but there's also always a social political, what we divide into social political, but it's all seamless. It all kind of runs together. So we can't ignore what is going on there. I had something I wanted to say now. Cost. Oh, I know, paper. So what was paper made out of? It was made out of rags. Yeah, have you ever heard the expression rag picker? Rag picker? That's someone that went around to look for rags to make paper out of it. So paper was made out of rags until about the middle of the 19th century, so around 1850. So there's this this dinky little town down I-5 there. It's called Everett. And Everett is there because of the sulfide pulping process. So you cut down a bunch of trees, you chop them up, you mash them into pulp, and you mix them with some chemicals, and you can make paper. And you can make it really cheap. Before about 1850, paper was really expensive. So books were rare and expensive still, even after Gutenberg, but the impact of Gutenberg was really critical because, you know, it spread books around. So 49 copies of Gutenberg's Bible still exist. Some are only partial copies. In 2015, an 8-page section of the book of Esther sold at auction for $970,000. Now that's ironic because Gutenberg died in poverty. Poor guy. All right, Constantinople falls. Why is this significant to the English Bible? Where is Constantinople? Constantinople is not the name of it today. It's got a different name. It's tricky. Istanbul, yeah, Istanbul, not Constantinople. There's a song. So, why is that significant? It's important. It's really actually very important. The Turks, yes. It was the Turks that took Constantinople. And when we say Turks, we know they're Islamic, right? So this is Islam capturing the very last stronghold of arguably the Roman Empire, still in 1453. It's the Eastern Roman Empire, which we call the Byzantine Empire. And they speak what? They spoke what? Greek. And what happens in 1450, Constantinople is this huge, magnificent city. The Turks have been trying to get it for like, let me think, 700 years. And they finally do. And they changed the name to Istanbul. Well, all these Greek-speaking scholars and people flee out of Constantinople. They flee to Western Europe. So all of a sudden, there's all these scholars who can speak Greek flooding into at the exact same time as when the universities are flourishing in Western Europe. Now, some of the universities in Western Europe started before this, but this is where they're really starting to become large and important, and all these Greek scholars show up from Constantinople. And the final thing, Martin Luther was born in 1483. So I think everybody knows Martin Luther, so let me go on to Henry VIII, reigns from 1509 to 1547. So this is what happened between Wycliffe and Henry VIII. Well, obviously, lots of other things happened. This is a page from a Gutenberg Bible. I thought I'd show it to you. What do you notice about this? What maybe seems odd to you about this? I'm sorry, I didn't hear. The print is the same as? Yes. So it looks like a manuscript. So you know, what can we conclude from that? Yeah, they thought of books kind of like manuscripts back then. They're still very expensive. The illuminations, the illustrations are actually drawn in after the book is printed. And it's still fairly expensive, but it's really hard to read. I mean, that black letter, Gothic letter type, whatever you want to call it, just is awful to read. Look at it. But this is a page from a book that was printed in Venice only a few years later in 1470. And this is what we call Roman type. You see how much easier this is to read? So they're making advances in printing, publishing, using typefaces and fonts, and it's a very rapid change, and there's a rapid expansion of the number of books that are coming out. Okay. King Henry VIII, King of England, 1509 to 47. This is the infamous King Henry, the 6 wives, King Henry. English school children apparently love to recite this rhyme. King Henry VIII, to 6 wives he was wedded. 1 died, 1 survived. 2 divorced. 2 beheaded. Okay. You will note, and let's see. Does anybody, Herman's Hermits, does that resonate with anyone? Okay. Good, Chris. Okay. Now, you young people have absolutely no clue as to what we're talking about, and that's just fine. We don't care. But that's, Henry VIII. So you will notice that he has red hair. Some of you will understand what that means, won't you? I'm not going to go any farther than that. It's fair to say that without Henry VIII, we would not have the English Bible as we know it. Not because Henry was so interested in that, but it's ironic because actually, at first, he was dead set against having an English language Bible. So, a little bit about Henry. He was the 2nd son of Henry VII. As the younger son, he was being groomed for an ecclesiastical career. They wanted him to go into the church. He should have been Archbishop or Cardinal Henry. Didn't happen because King's older brother Arthur suddenly died. That made Henry the king. He was a scholar, actually, a theologian. He could read and write several languages, including Latin, and he was very religious in his youth. He had actually written a defense of papal authority that was directed against Martin Luther, which earned the British Henry and the British crown in perpetuity the title Defender of the Faith, or in Latin, Fide Defensor. Fide Defensor. The British monarchy uses this even up until today. And so this is a little show and tell. I have some British coins here. Now, these are older British coins. This one is a ½ crown. And you'll see on it that it has FID DEF. Stands for Fide Defensor, among some other things on here. And this one is a 2 shillings. And this one is 6 pence. Now, at great risk and with some qualms, I'm going to pass these around. Now, I have to tell you, if this was an audience of Presbyterians or Methodists, I probably wouldn't do this, but with you guys, I feel fairly safe. Okay. So, groomed for the church, theologian. He liked to argue theological topics with his associates. And so I think that we can say as a young man, Henry clung very tightly to his religious convictions. And here she is. This is Anne Boleyn. Anne was Henry's 2nd wife. And she was both a solution and then ultimately a problem for him. She was a solution because Catherine of Aragon, Henry's 1st wife, had failed to produce a son and an heir to the throne. This is always a big concern to a monarch. You want to have an heir to the throne. It makes things people get very nervous and things become very unstable if there's no heir. This was especially true in England at this time because Henry VII's father had acquired the throne on the field of battle against Richard III in what was called the Wars of the Roses. And almost everybody, that's an exaggeration. There are a whole lot of nobility in England that at least had some kind of claim to the throne. I suspect if we looked at half of the people in this room, and we looked at your family trees and we could trace them back, you'd have a claim to the throne of England or France or Spain or somewhere else. You go back far enough, and it said that just about everybody's related to Charlemagne, 8th century. So Henry had this problem. He felt like he was a little bit shaky on the throne. And Catherine failed to produce a male heir. Now, she did have a daughter, a lovely daughter whose name was Mary. But they didn't want Mary to succeed to the throne. So, becoming infatuated with Anne up there, Henry decided to divorce Catherine. But there was a difficulty. What do you suppose the difficulty was? Yeah, the church didn't believe in divorce. The Pope was opposed. The Pope was opposed not probably because he wouldn't have let Henry VIII off the hook, but because of a little family problem. You know, people have these family problems. The papal territory in Italy was at that point in history controlled by a guy named the Emperor Charles V. Emperor Charles V was the Holy Roman Emperor. Now, you probably heard the old joke. The Holy Roman Empire was neither holy, nor Roman, nor an empire. But it was a pretty powerful entity. It was a dynastic holding of this emperor, included lots of places in Central Europe, Spain, and even in the Netherlands. So he had quite a bit of, so he controls the papal territory in Italy. The problem here was that Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, who controlled the Pope's territory, was Catherine of Aragon's nephew. You see the problem. So, the Pope didn't want to do this. So Henry acted in defiance of the Pope by having the Archbishop of Canterbury divorce him from Catherine and marry him to Anne. Now, he didn't actually get a divorce, so Alex is quite right. They didn't have to, well, maybe in certain cases, but that would be extraordinarily rare. This was an annulment, and it was an annulment based on this. Henry had married his brother's widow. So what Henry was actually seeking was an annulment based on a proposition that you shouldn't do that, even though he did. So what this did was this initiated the split between England and Rome, and it began the Protestant Reformation in England, and ultimately Henry was excommunicated by the Pope and declared himself the head of the Church of England. And the English monarchy today is still the head of the church in England. So, although there were rumblings from down below of Protestant things going on, and that's had been since Wycliffe, right? Wycliffe, I think I was going to say something about Wycliffe's followers. Oh, goodness, yes. I missed a page. Would you like a quick trip back to Wycliffe? Sure you would. Wycliffe had so I'm going back 100, 150 years, had supporters in both high and low places. So he had, like peasant people that were supporting him. He also had some of the very highest nobility, including one of the heirs to the English throne at that time, who were protecting him. Now, he had been condemned as a heretic at several ecclesiastical councils, and he was just very lucky to get away with not being burned in life. However, by 1428, this is like 40 years, it's roughly 40 years after he had died, the Catholic Church had him dug up, burned, and his ashes were thrown into the river Swift, which is a tributary of the river Avon, as in Stratford upon the Avon. And Wycliffe's followers then continued to circulate the Bible and his memory. And there was a poem that was fairly common, apparently, at that time. It says, "The Avon to the Severn runs, the Severn to the sea, and Wycliffe's dust shall spread abroad, wide as the waters be." I wanted to get that in because I've entitled today's session, "Wide as the Waters Be." Okay, yes. Let me just say this about the English Bible. To be an Englishman, eventually at some point in this Protestant Reformation, meant you read the Bible. It really did. If you're an Englishman, you read the Bible. If you read the Bible, you're an Englishman. And this is in ways that no other country or people were doing. So Frenchmen didn't do this, Dutchmen didn't do this. It was part and parcel of their identity. And this becomes much more extreme later on, as we're going to see, like at the time of the King James Bible, when the Puritans were around. But I think we can say no other language has been so formative for the Bible as English, and it's never been as bound up with national identity and culture. So that makes the English Bible pretty unique. Also, English is very impactful as a language. The most spoken language in the world today is what? What's the most spoken language in the world? Well, no, okay, let me back up. Let me add a little bit to that. The most spoken language as a native language, your first language. Sure, who said that? Yeah, Mandarin Chinese, sure, because there's like 1.3 billion Chinese. That's like, one out of 10 people walking around on Earth are Chinese. But Mandarin Chinese is very rarely spoken outside of China unless you happen to be a Chinese expat. What language then is the most spoken as a second language? Well, it's English. And English literature has been more impactful. And the Bible has impacted the English language and literature in intense ways. All right, sorry about that. I missed a whole page. So fast forward, we're back to Henry VIII. Okay. So Henry decides, I need a divorce. I need an annulment. I want out of this. I need a son. Oh, I should say this. Henry didn't have any legitimate sons. He did have the Duke of Richmond, who was an illegitimate son. He couldn't inherit the throne. So, English Reformation, top down. German Reformation, Luther, peasants go out, slaughter everybody, bloody, awful, bottom up. Top down, bottom up. England is top down. But I don't want to minimize the fact that there were lots of people out there that wanted to reform the English church at this point. Now, Queen Anne had Protestant inclinations, and she had Henry read a book called The Obedience of a Christian Man by a fellow named William Tyndale. Now, I have a strong attachment to Tyndale because my cherished wife's maiden name is Tyndall. And undoubtedly, she's descended from or related to Tyndall in some way. So Henry reads this book, The Obedience of a Christian Man, and he approved it. He thought it was great. Now, up to this point, you write a Bible in English, you burned at the stake. Well, things are changing. All right. So, unfortunately, Anne made the mistake of disappointing Henry by only having a daughter. Daughter named Elizabeth. But everybody knew she wouldn't be queen. And ultimately, Anne just completely lost her head over this. All right. I'm sorry, the type, I'm probably sure you can't read this, so I'll try to read it for you. Just a part of it. And it chanced in those days, and that's the English, where you see the YT there, that's still the Old English th. So it chanced in those days that there went out a commandment from Augustus the emperor that all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was the first and executed when Cyrenius was lieutenant in Syria. And every man went unto his own village to be taxed. And Joseph also ascended from Galilee out of a city called Nazareth into Judea, or Jewry, unto the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be taxed with Mary, his espoused wife, which was with child. And it fortuned, while they were there, that her time was come that she should be delivered, and she brought forth her first begotten son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger. Okay, enough. What version is this? What version? Who did this? What version? What did you say? It is. It's Tyndale. All right. Does that strike anybody as strange? What version of the Bible is this? It came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus, all the world should be taxed. And this taxing was first made when Cyrenius was governor of Syria. And all went to be taxed, everyone into his own city. And Joseph also went up from Galilee out of the city of Nazareth into Judea, unto the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was the house and lineage of David, to be taxed with Mary, his espoused wife, being great with child. And so it was that while they were there, the days were accomplished that she should be delivered. King James. All right. This compares the two. What does this tell us? Well, it tells us something really interesting, very interesting, I think. Well, sure, yes, it's in the language of the common man, and it's not real elevated English. It's English that the people could probably read pretty well. I mean, again, the English were probably better educated than most people at a certain point in time. And why? Because they wanted to read the Bible. Or it could be read out to them, of course. But there's something else I'm driving at. Kathy? Well, yes. Look at the resemblance. The King James Version is probably 80% William Tyndale. So where do we get King James from? Tyndale. It's how important Tyndale is. So if you look at Bibles today, let's say some obscure, strange, odd Bible that nobody reads, like the ESV. The ESV traces right back to the Revised Standard Version, which traces back to the Revised Version, which are revisions. So the ESV is actually a revision of the Revised Standard Version. The Revised Standard Version is a revision of the Revised Version. The Revised Version, done in 1880, is a revision of King James, and King James is 80% Tyndale. Okay. It's 10 o'clock. So here is William Tyndale. And the quote up there, you might not be able to read this. If God spare my life, ere many years, I will cause a boy who drives the plow to know more of the scriptures than you do. Now, this is attributed to Tyndale. It might be apocryphal. It's a little hard to tell. But the context around this was Tyndale was talking to a priest, or possibly the Bishop of London, when he said this remark. And the priest or Bishop of London had gotten angry with Tyndale. They were talking, and said, well, you know, I think that the tradition and the Pope have more authority than the scriptures. And then Tyndale supposedly said this back in response. You see Tyndale's dates there, 1494 to 1536. Tyndale worked mostly in Germany. He possibly met Luther And let's see, born 1494. Got ahead of myself. Received as MA from Oxford in 1515. He studied at Cambridge from 1515 to 1521 and was ordained in 1521. So he was an ordained priest in the Catholic Church. In 1523, he approached the Bishop of London, Cuthbert Tunstall, don't you love that name, about translating the Bible, but was rebuffed by Tunstall. This is kind of interesting. Tunstall was a fairly well-educated guy who, if times hadn't been what they were, might have been receptive to this. He had written some things that you might indicate that, he would have been receptive to this. The problem was that in Germany, what was happening was the Lutherans had started slaughtering everybody, basically. And there was civil war going on. What happened in Germany was a bloodbath. So the Protestant, reformers, the peasants went wild, and it wasn't all about religion. A lot of it was about how oppressed they had been and so forth, and they started fighting back. And this is called the 30 Years' War, and it was a nasty, nasty thing. They didn't want that for England. The English are always very well behaved. They don't do things like this. So having been rebuffed by the bishop, and this was Tyndall's goal now, it became sort of his passion, his life's work. He sailed for Hamburg, Germany in 1520, never came back to England. He completed his New Testament in 1526. So he started it in 1524 and he completed it in 1526. He translated the New Testament in 2 years. He completed the Pentateuch in 1530. Tyndall worked on the Old Testament, but never finished all of it. He was captured on the continent. He was convicted of heresy, and he was burned at the stake in 1536. So the Tyndall translation. Can someone read Genesis 3:4? Find Genesis 3:4, please. And the serpent said to the woman, "You shall not surely die." Here's the Tyndall translation. Tush, you shall not die. Tush, you shall not die. Okay, Genesis 39:2. I'm waiting for the pastor to read that one out. Just tush. Tush. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a prosperous man, and I read out the rest of it, but here's Tyndall. The Lord was with Joseph, and he was a lucky fellow.
Idea for
idea. It's bright, it's clean, it's crisp, it's fun. Let's do Matthew 6:34. Okay, and here's the Tyndall version of that. Care not then for the morrow, but let ye morrow care for itself, for the day present hath ever enough of his own trouble. So, it's clean, it's vigorous, it was probably the greatest translation done of the Bible since maybe Jerome did the Latin Vulgate and put it into the Latin for the people at that point in time. It's brilliant, actually. Okay. Tyndale included marginal notes that Henry referred to as pestilential glosses. For example, Numbers 23:8 reads, "How shall I curse whom God curseth not?" Tyndale's note read, "The Pope can tell how." Did not endear him to Henry VIII. Although Henry liked his book. Architect of English. He introduced the only English theological term that we have is atonement. That was Tyndale's. He created 1,100 words never written before in English. So some examples of coined words: beautiful, fisherman, landlady, seashore, stumbling block, taskmaster, zealous, Passover, scapegoat, modesty, mediocrity, industrious, long-suffering, peacemakers, ungodly, castaway, busybody, Jehovah, housetop, infidel, sorcerer, uproar, and nurse. And phrases that we know that were introduced by Tyndale. Let there be light, and there was light. Male and female created he them. My brother's keeper, coat of many colors, salt of the earth, powers that be, law unto themselves, filthy lucre, stranger in a strange land, pillar of salt, blind lead the blind, cast the first stone, and fight the good fight. Legacy of Tyndale. He influenced most subsequent English Bibles. ESV, as I said, descendant from King James, which highly influenced by Tyndale. We're going to do King James next week. He helped form the English language. He translated the first English Bible out of the original languages. Who did he use? He used Erasmus. Erasmus had translated into the Greek. So there was now a Greek version of the Bible. I say he translated. He got a lot of the Greek manuscripts together and created a Greek Bible, complete Greek Bible that hadn't existed in the Middle Ages up until that point. He also used the Septuagint. He used other Greek and Hebrew sources that he had, and he also consulted Lutherans' German translation. He certainly had read it. Tyndale spoke 8 languages fluently. It was said that you couldn't tell Tyndale from a native speaker in any of these languages, German, French, Italian, Hebrew, well, not Hebrew, but Spanish, and so on. He moved the nation in the direction of Protestantism. So the Greek word ecclesia in Tyndale becomes congregation, not church. In the Latin Bible, it was church. Why is that a difference? Yeah. Catholic Church wanted it to be church. Presbyter in the Greek becomes elder and not priest. That's a big difference. And metanoia became repentance, not penance. The Catholic Church, one of its sacraments is penance. So it's definitely an anti-Catholic Bible. But this is correct. This really conforms to what the Greek actually says. And his dying prayer was, Lord, open the King of England's eyes. Well, Henry VIII changes his mind. I think we're going to have to wait until next week to find out his change of mind. And so, quick prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for giving us this message this morning. Help us to go forward better informed about how the Bible came to be, and help us to be good witnesses of your word and your message this week and henceforward. Ask this in your name, amen.